Okay, just waiting for it to go live. Okay, I believe we are live on the Canadian Association for Equality Facebook page, so you could also follow along there as well. At the end of the event, by the way, I'm going to say a few quick words about CAFE's federal election mobilization effort. So if you want to get involved in helping raise awareness about men's issues, in particular equal parenting, parental alienation, and reforms to the family justice system, stick around for a bit of a commercial on that at the end of the event. Let me introduce tonight's featured speaker, Douglas Todd, who is a columnist with the Vancouver Sun and Postmedia News for 38 years. As one of Canada's most prolific reporters covering men's issues, his work has appeared in the National Post, Toronto Sun, Calgary Herald, Ottawa Citizen, Windsor Star, Edmonton Journal, and Montreal Gazette. He's also received 33 national and international journalism awards, two-time winner of the Templeton Religion Reporter of the Year Award, winner of the Canadian National Newspaper Award, and he's been given top prizes for commentary from the American Academy of Religion. He's also 18 times finalist and 6 times winner of the Jack Webster Foundation Award, and that's for excellence in BC journalism. His interests include cultural and gender issues, diversity, spirituality, and migration, and he's the chair of the International Association of Religion Journalists. With that, I want to turn things over to Douglas Todd. Douglas, it's all yours.
Thanks, Justin. And welcome to Vancouver, everyone. This just rained in Vancouver for the second time in 3 months. We've had a really drought-ridden summer. It's been a bit scary. Lots of fires going around the province that sometimes the smoke comes into Vancouver. I just start out by saying I'm a writer and a researcher. I'm not really a teacher, although, I do give talks from time to time. And this is the first webinar I've given, and so getting used to that. But I'm hoping my lack of professional sort of presentations will be made up for by some pretty solid content, because we're talking about a very important issues here that don't get much attention. The promotional material for CAFE from CAFE kindly introduced me as Canada's leading men's issues reporter. And the scary thing is that actually could be true. There aren't many of us. I might be one of the only journalists in Canada who treats men's issues as a specialty. And I only do it occasionally, right? I have these other specialties that I also take on. And here's some more context to that somewhat disturbing reality. At my newspaper alone, the Vancouver Sun, we're a good-sized newsroom. Well, in this day and age, we are. I'd say there are at least 4 other reporters who specialize in women's issues. And so say that there's another 20 or 25 newsrooms about our size across Canada. I would suggest there's at least 3 or 4 journalists at those news outlets also specialize in women's issues. So you got, at a very rough estimate, you've got 100 reporters across Canada and columnists specializing in women's issues. And you've got me in Vancouver and working for Postmedia, which is at least has got a national scope, writing about men's issue. It's a little concerning. By the way, please, maybe later people, if there are some journalists in Canada writing about men's issues that I'm not aware of, I would really like to hear about it. I think there's been a guy at the Globe and Mail sort of taking it on every once in a while, but I'm not in contact with him. Then as I was preparing for this, I was imagining a world where, say, Canada had 20 reporters and journalists writing about men's issues, somewhat often. I think it'd be quite a different country, actually, in the way we look at the issues of the day. I'm going to start by reviewing some of the coverage that CAFE and Justin highlighted in the invitation to this webinar. Maybe start with the topic of men's suicide. Oh, and I'm going to do a bit of screen sharing of just some headlines that I've written over the years. Maybe I'll start trying to do that right now. Yeah. I've written about men's suicide several times. This is the latest version. I'll just leave it up there for you, just something to look at, so you don't have to look at me too closely. This men's suicide is a issue that gets a decent reader's response. Judging by, we have in-house analytics at the paper, so we can tell how many people are reading everything we do. And it's sort of positive to see that male suicide does get a fair amount of interest from the public. Dare say a bit more from the public than from other journalists. So I began writing about the silent epidemic of male suicide about 6 years ago. And those early 5-year-old articles are still getting readers. You probably won't be surprised to hear there is a culture in newsrooms that generally sees women as victims and males as oppressors. But the issue of male suicide is a sign of how the public is kind of opening its mind to the problems associated with men. And so just the basics on male suicide, as you folks probably know, is that men in the West tend to commit suicide or take their own lives, I should say, at about 3 times the rate of women. 3 times the rate of women. I mean, the rate is even higher among Indigenous men. But of course, the focus of the Canadian media when it comes to Indigenous issues is on the problems faced by Indigenous women and girls, which are significant, but so are the problems faced by Indigenous men. I've quoted many people over the years saying there's a crisis of despair among many Canadian men. And I've also delved into how suicide rates go up greatly around divorce and custody issues, and that men are not that great at obtaining help for many reasons. We'll get into that a bit later, maybe. This piece in front of you, it's relates male suicide to the opioid crisis, which is out of control in BC, and well, it's pretty bad in North America in general, but in BC, we seem to be the epicenter of dirty drugs and fentanyl and overdoses. We've had 7,000 opioid-related deaths in the last 5 years. So even at the height of COVID, people were dying from opioid overdoses and other sort of forms of drug deaths at a higher rate than they were from the coronavirus. The BC government called the opioid crisis a crisis or emergency 5 years ago. And I would estimate that the Vancouver media alone have probably written at least thousands of stories about the opioid crisis and about opioid deaths. But very few of those articles and TV programs ever mention what is blindingly obvious to me, and that's that 4 out of 5 opioid deaths are males. 4 out of 5 opioid deaths are males. Yet nearly all the stories written by other people about the crisis refer to how many people are dying from opioids. But I think we would know, this crowd would think if 80% of the deaths were female, it would be shouted from the highest roofs that the opioid crisis is a women's issue. But this rarely gets mentioned as a men's issue. So why are men more inclined to succumb to opioid deaths? Some of the psychotherapists I've talked to, including UBC's John Ogrodnichuk, who's in the photo there, he described how heavy drug use basically adds up to a slow suicide. John and others say excessive drug use is not a result of kind of, men are associated with higher risk taking. That's why they died more from drugs, etc. But he thinks it's not really risk taking. It's just that so many men who use drugs heavily just no longer give a shit. They don't care about their lives anymore. So Grodnichuk and his team, they've put together, he's a good resource for cafe and men's issues. They put together a website on male depression and suicide called Heads Up Guys. Heads Up Guys. I think it was originally funded by Movember. It gets 60,000 hits a month, which is a lot. And it shows the level of public concern out there about men. But that worry that, expressed there is coming from the silent majority, but I don't think it's at all reflected in the media coverage devoted to men's issues. And that, unfortunately, that lack of government, that lack of interest in men's issues, carries over into governments, as Cafe knows quite well. As John Ogrodnichuk says, there are virtually no mental health resources available for men in regards to depression, opioid use, or suicide prevention. And I so appreciate the work the Cafe is doing to try and to make some inroads here. Next sort of thing I want to talk about, and I've written about, is how men's work comes with much greater risk than most work. Oh, that's another slide about another piece I did on let's find out why opioid victims are mostly men. And I'll just go to the men's work often comes with high risk. This is an issue that just doesn't get coverage, even though it's so blindingly obvious to me. I don't know if people are aware that men are 20 times more likely to get killed on the job than women, 20 times more likely. Another way to put it is 95% of workplace deaths are men. In regards to severe injuries, men are also, get severe injuries 75% of the time, compared to 25% from females. So in BC alone, there's 63 truck drivers were killed in a recent 5-year period. All men. 34 men were killed in construction in that same period. 31 BC firefighters died, as did 17 chainsaw operators. I could go on and on. The risk of death and severe injury are it's something, there's so much stress on equality and emphasis on equality and helping the lower economic groups and that these days, but somehow people are missing that the risk of death and severe injury is much higher among men in lower socioeconomic groups. It's just not a group that the educated class and the sort of chattering class is know much about or care much about. There's a real cultural divide there. One of my pet peeves is it'll sound kind of nasty, but every year the BC Nurses Union, which is, God bless nurses and everything, they come out with a report that gets a lot on injuries to nurses, which always gets a lot of media attention, but the severity of the injuries is nothing compared to what's happening on a daily basis to men in the construction trade, the truck driving trade, firefighters, and the forest industry and mining and all that sort of stuff. It's just not an issue that catches the public's imagination. The unusual thing, and I'll get to this a bit, is job segregation is actually becoming more extreme. In BC, only 1 in 50 carpenters are female, and only 1 in 100 pipe fitters, for example, are female. That whole thing about equality in the workplace is just not happening. And I think the culture doesn't value jobs that require masculine characteristics such as physical strength, determination, and sometimes risk-taking. Just to continue with that idea of, let's just a sec here. This is an issue that hang on here. People don't relate to. As the workplace is becoming more and more equal in opportunity, the surprise is that men and women are taking more stereotypical jobs, but based on gender in most cases. This shows up especially in super equal countries like Sweden and such. In past decades, the workplace in the Western world has become more and more equal in opportunity, but the response has been the opposite of what you might expect. Women and men, despite theoretically being encouraged to do all kinds of work, are increasingly choosing gender stereotypical careers. Women dominate in education and healthcare, and they strongly avoid the trades, as I've just shown. The other thing is women are 13 times more likely to leave the labor force entirely than men, even when small children and marriage are not an issue for them. So polling shows that traditional beliefs about gender are strong. For instance, in Pew Research, it's a really good research company in the United States, they found that half of Americans say children are better off if their mother stays at home. So half of Americans say children are better off if their mother stays at home. Well, just 8% feel the same about the importance of fathers being at home. And that's despite half of American men saying they'd like to spend more time with their children. Many men are in fact sacrificing their heart's desire to be with the children so as to not hurt the family financially. And they're not getting much credit for it. Philip Zimbardo has put out, he's an American psychiatrist, has put out quite a good book on men and boys. And he puts it this way, I'll read his quote. Men work more hours and are willing to do so because they are rewarded with love when they pick up the tab. And women are rewarded with love when they reduce their hours or drop out of the workforce after having children. It's a gender trend line. It's very traditional that goes almost entirely unnoticed by the mainstream media. For example, when I wrote this piece, whenever it was, a couple of years ago, I could tell by the analytics almost got no readers. It's in some of my stuff does really well, but this one didn't, and I wonder why sometimes. It's like something people don't want to accept about the culture. And just, I'm going through about 9 different issues I've written about over the years, by the way, and this is the next one. I won't stay with it too long because it's about who are the most educated and least educated in Canada. And it plays into that, very strong narrative of the last couple of years, especially about white male privilege. But in Canada, the real data shows that only 24% of Canadian males, in this case, Canadian white males have university degrees. 24% of Canadian white males have university degrees. That's far less than the rate for females. And it's about half the rate for the first generation immigrants and visible minorities, both female and male. Indeed, I've written about in some ways it was seen as a positive story. The most highly educated cohort in Canada is made up of women of color, 3.2 million of them. They're the most highly educated cohort in Canada. And they, particularly those with roots in China and India. And so it's these stats on education don't really support the argument about white male privilege, but it's a hard argument to make very directly, I must say. And I might even be getting in trouble for saying it here in this webinar. So just staying a bit more with job segregation, and that's another issue that, highlighted in the preview or the promo. Let's see. And that's about male teachers in the education system. They're disappearing. There's another sort of killer fact in this regard. Only of all the people entering the teaching profession in Canada these days, only 1 in 10 are male. So unlike movements to get women into engineering, there are no efforts in BC or across Canada that I know of to get more males into teaching. for this piece, I talked to the president of the BC Teachers Federation. He told me that all the effort currently is going to get Indigenous teachers into the education system, which is also really important because they're underrepresented. But surely the education system is capable of working on more than one front of it at a time. And the BC Federation president at that point wasn't really of that mind. He just didn't see it as that big an issue. Although he did acknowledge that some men don't go into teaching because they don't want to be falsely labeled as pedophiles. And I've heard it from some of my teacher friends too, that it is a real fear among males and even people in the system that, if they do something at all, suspicious, they could be accused of being a pedophile. It's especially men who are interested in being elementary school teachers. So it's kind of a tragic situation where boys aren't getting many male teachers anymore. It was a field that was kind of balanced 30 or 40 years ago, but it's dramatically changing. And there are also studies that showing that boys tend to learn better from male teachers, as girls tend to learn better from female teachers. So boys are going to end up, or they're already at a great disadvantage for a lack of male teachers, especially male teachers who could be role models as men. Boys need positive role models, obviously. And just to add something related to this field of how certain sort of helping professions are becoming incredibly skewed towards females and kind of no-go fields for men, is that it's also happening in psychology in North America. Amongst psychologists, they were once even pretty well evenly split between men and women, but now it's almost the people going into the profession now are almost entirely female. 8 of 9 psychologists in North America under age 35 are now female. So that makes it hard, of course, for males who are struggling to find therapists to talk to who are male. Not that every male needs to talk to a male therapist, but they certainly should have the choice. And it could be very suitable for a lot of guys who are going through problems. There's another thing that comes out about in the issue of psychology is that most research is being done on women's issues. Men are kind of being ignored, and so are boys. There's a good study done at UBC by a psychologist, and he's found that the vast majority of psychological research is on women's issues. Okay, then we'll move into another issue that always gets me in trouble, and maybe Cafe is too, and that's domestic violence data. I don't know if people are familiar with Alexandra Lizova from SFU. I think she's known to some people at Cafe. She's doing some fabulous research on domestic disputes, along with quite a good team of mostly women, actually, from around North America. I think, with the exception of people like Alexandra and Dawn Dutton, United States is quite a bit ahead of Canada on sort of coming to reality about what's going on with domestic violence. This story in front of you is just, I think it's fairly recent, yeah, from July, where Lysova, Alexandra, found that, there's been so much warnings that domestic violence was going to go up during COVID because people in families are going to be confined to their homes more. And there's lots of warnings from family support groups, from women's groups, that this was happening. But she's looked at the data from Stats Canada and says it's pretty well flat. It hasn't changed much. And Alexandra went to a conference in the United States where it was quietly kind of reported that the same thing was being discovered in 11 US cities. Alexandra and others have all the usual and just cautions that, this data might not be perfect and some people might not be reporting domestic violence to police, which is true. But the good thing about data from Statistics Canada is it's collected the same way over the years. So the trends that show up there should be pretty, they're not just based on anecdotes. Actually, that's for you folks who are interested in domestic violence issues. You're probably aware that depending on the kind of the way you collect the data, you come up with tremendously different results. StatsCan generally reports to police of domestic disputes, and that comes up with it 4 out of 5 times the males are the perpetrators. But StatsCan has also collected data from the Canada Household Survey, which is based on just individual interviews with people, like thousands of people. So it's quite reliable. And those surveys show that men are roughly equal in terms of being victims of domestic the violence in just a very broad way. There's different nature of violence, but most of this work done on domestic violence, and it's kind of accepted among the specialists in North America, and including I've done work on Don Dutton's work out at UBC. They write that most domestic violence is so-called bilateral, or a better word for it maybe is mutual. They've female and male researchers across North America who aren't beholden to sort of the ideology of the day have found 3 out of 4 cases of intimate partner violence include women as mutual aggressors. So most domestic violence, as Alexandra and Don say, and comes out of just arguments that just start escalating and get out of control. But the aggression is on both sides. But the public is generally not aware of that, and neither is the neither are governments. And this, just to add sort of, there's no issue I write about that makes my editors more nervous than domestic violence stuff when I start bringing up this data. But to their credit, they publish what I write. Okay. Yeah. Moving on to an eighth kind of theme that I write about from time to time. This isn't the greatest slide because it's a headline that wasn't very well, doesn't look very good on our website, but that's it, just to put it there. And it's about stereotyping of men over the years, and of women. And one of the huge stereotypes now relates to domestic violence is that men are always the aggressor, women are always the victims. It's just sort of accepted by so many. But it's unfair, and it's kind of disastrous stereotype about males. I think women can justifiably complain about the media portraying them too much in an over-sexualized way, but men can justifiably complain about being portrayed as idiots and buffoons in the mass culture. Indeed, most people who have researched the subject say that men in mass culture are most commonly portrayed as one of 2 things, either as dangerous or incompetent. These can be powerful negative stereotypes, as stereotypes have been for women throughout history. And stereotypes have been very destructive for Black people, Indigenous people, and others. Negative cultural images can easily be internalized by people who begin subconsciously to believe they themselves actually are dangerous or incompetent. It's devastating, I imagine, for boys who grow up in cultures where men are constantly being characterized as dangerous or incompetent. So to get a little bit more positive near the end of this, or the last, now, maybe a bit more prescriptive. There are some things that can be done about such stereotyping, and that's to raise consciousness, one's own consciousness about how men are labeled. Look into the nature of the accusations. How accurate are they, and how inaccurate are they? Another thing people can do is help boys develop positive role models so they don't succumb to the culture's negative stereotypes about boys and men. Another thing people can do is work with boys and men to talk about difficult issues, about the challenges of being male in the 21st century in this part of the world. For instance, one psychologist I talked to says, when it comes to raising boys, it's not a great idea necessarily to ask them about what their passions are, because some of those passions might not be realistic. Their passion might be to be Ronaldo or something like that, or Messi, or to drink, have a good time with the boys drinking. That's not the greatest passions. This psychologist suggesting more about asking boys what they aspire to, and their answers will kind of point to things that require some discipline and effort, rather than just sort of, well, I want to do whatever I want to do. I thought that was pretty good from that psychologist. Yeah, I could say a lot about stereotypes about men. I have written about it quite a few times over the years. It's a hard one to keep battling, but got to keep doing it. Here's another issue I write about, and just recently, actually, more recently, and that's, sorry, not this one, sorry. And that's the whole thing of parental alienation, which is super important to CAFE and the work they're doing with men's and shelters. There was recently a big global conference organized by UBC where Edward Kruk, a UBC guy, organized it. He's a specialist in parental alienation, which is when one spouse goes out of his or her way to demonize the other spouse, usually during divorce. I think this is a problem that's finally getting some more attention, even beyond specialists like me, or at least it is from scholars. And I can always be hopeful it's getting broader attention. So even though most judges and divorce lawyers and women's advocates ignore it, there is a concerted effort by some academics to show that in divorce, shared parenting is best. Parental alienation, in which one partner goes out of their way to demonize the other parent, is proving extremely harmful to children. Studies show that divorced couples who share parenting produce more satisfied children, more well-adjusted children. Trouble is, Canada's competitive divorce system in the United States as well can sometimes and often reward parents who seek sole custody or try to alienate the child from the other spouse. The trouble is, the child trained to despise one parent invariably ends up depressed and with low self-esteem. So that fight with the other spouse and demonizing of the other spouse, unless the other spouse truly is violent and dangerous, that competition with the other spouse really hurts the children over the long run. Trouble is, many social workers and judges still believe in the false idea that children need mostly to bond with one parent, and usually the mother. But the research shows the opposite. This is research from the United States and Europe. Scholars, actually, at this UBC conference, there was 1,000 people attending, mostly on Zoom, I think, but they're from around North America and Europe, and they feel so strongly about the value of shared parenting that they voted at a recent conference to recommend that a parent who tries to alienate a child from another parent should be charged with a criminal offense, that'd be some new territory for the courts. The good thing about the issue of parental alienation is, in terms of sort of having some cultural sway, is that you can talk about the idea of shared parenting. It sort of sounds positive, right? Which it is. And it's a way to kind of sidestep, how men are portrayed. So just talk about the idea of shared parenting, equal parenting. I think it's something that the culture responds to these days. Yeah. I write about other things about men. It's a fascinating topic. I don't know why other people don't do it. But I'll just end with this one. And it's about sort of psychotherapy in men. And the piece I enjoyed doing quite a while ago, which we titled "A New Vocabulary for Men," and it's based on some work that Marv Westwood and David Kuhl are doing out at UBC and elsewhere. And they've worked with men for a long time, sort of, with respect to the men's movement and Robert Bly and all that stuff, but in a different way. They've done lots of work with veterans and first responders, and they've got some, and even got some federal money for it to kind of develop workshops especially group workshops for men. So as shown in these articles I've been writing about, workplace deaths, suicide, opioid deaths, a lot of men are really struggling. And I'm sure that's why people are interested in supporting CAFE. And I think if women are treated as sex objects, men are often treated as success objects. Women as sex objects, men as success objects. And when they start to struggle in that role of being the successful provider, things can go very badly. So as I say, Marv Westwood and Kuhl have worked a lot with men, and they've concluded that over decades of work, actually, that men are very devoted to helping other men when they get the opportunity. They've seen, I've actually been in one of these groups where you just see men really come to the fore for other men when they're in pain or feeling grief, which a lot of men do. There's a lot of unacknowledged grief out there. And in their work, they've come up with some new vocabulary for working with men, vocabulary with a bit of a masculine edge, which I just find interesting, I must say. Maybe not super important, but I find it interesting. So, there's been all this talk about we want more sensitive men. Men should be more sensitive. And so rather than using the word sensitive, which is a bit of a whatever, they would talk about the importance of men being honorable. And I think I like that term honorable, I must admit, because it doesn't suggest softness necessarily. It actually suggests some toughness, but also with a lot of fairness and integrity. And instead of asking men to share their feelings, which sounds a little feminine or whatever, they suggest men tell their story. Instead of men saying men need support, they talk about offering men backup. Bit of a military term, but it makes sense to me. And even instead of talking about men healing, they talk about men repairing or getting themselves back. So perhaps I'm including this with a bit of a focus on men's therapy because there's a lot for men to be disturbed about and to talk about these days. And they need all the help they can get in finding strength to get through it. As I've shown, many men are in psychological and economic crises these days, and it's being largely ignored by the media and the culture. It's disheartening that so few in government, education, and the media are willing to look at men's issues, but it is heartening to see the work that CAFE is doing on many fronts. So that's my little presentation, and I look forward to questions and answers. It's sometimes more fun to be kind of spontaneous rather than making a presentation.
Well, thanks so much, Doug. And I think we're going to be finding this a stimulating discussion because I've already seen a number of questions and or comments while you were presenting. And so let's just jump right to the Q&A. And a reminder that if you do not want your name public on the Facebook or the YouTube pages where this is live and or will be posted, please change your name. I had one person indicate they were having trouble doing that. I can change your name. So if you want to chat to me, that you want your name changed to your initials before you ask a question, I would invite you to do that. And otherwise, you can put up your hand. There's a raise your hand. I believe it's at the bottom of your Zoom webinar portal. So put up your hand, and we will give you the floor, and then you can engage directly with Douglas Todd. Who would like to go first? Okay, we've got Mark. Just a second, Mark. Okay. Go ahead with your question.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Hey, thank you. Thanks so much for the talk and for all your work. It's great to see all the different topics. I'm generally interested in any studies or metrics that show how much less attention men are getting in the media. You mentioned at the beginning, you were one of the only male writers in Canada, and there's so many, writers who focus on female issues. I should say one of the few writers who focus on men's issues. And then you specifically mentioned a psychologist who did a study about men, how there are fewer psychological studies on men than on women. So I guess number one, could you tell me exactly what that study is? And then number two, do you know of any other studies or metrics that sort of show this lack of attention to male issues?
Yeah. Let me just find the name of that guy who did that study. He was out at UBC. I just gotta, where is it? Just hang on a second. I could also get it later for you, but
because I feel like I think a long time ago NCFM did some sort of a study where they looked at the newspaper for 2 weeks and tracked every article. It's like 95% to 5% coverage. But I'm just looking for metrics and data on that.
yeah, no, that's a really good point. So you need the metrics to make any of your points these days, because
Yep.
ideal. Shoot, it's not coming up. I think his name is Bedi, Bedi. Kind of he's got a Sikh background.
Okay.
But I don't want to scramble with my papers too much right now.
Okay, and you saw that it was on BBC, did you say, or where did you see him?
No, he's a UBC researcher.
Oh,
He's in the
UBC researcher.
He's in the education department. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look for that. And if I can't find it, I'll ping you.
Yeah, that'd be great. It was a
you,
very
Mark.
useful study, and it actually, when it came out, it actually got some mainstream attention in the educational and psychological community. He won an award for it. People weren't defensive about it. I was very pleased to see that.
Cool. And that's
Right.
University of British Columbia.
BC, British Columbia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we find the study during the webinar, or if anybody out there finds it, just use the chat, and if you just get it to me, I can forward it on to everybody in the webinar. Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Let's go to Ron with his hand up. Go ahead, Ron.
Mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Douglas, for your. Unfortunately, I had a previous meeting and missed your whole presentation. I just caught the last little bit about words, which I totally agree. I'm a city councilor over on Vancouver Island, and I've watched your articles over the years with great interest, and I got to thank you for being one of, as you say, one of the only, and certainly in my mind, the best writers that are able to articulate, some of the issues that men have to deal with. I've worked for most of my adult life with men, being involved in men's groups and pushing forward, focusing mostly on men's health, and have really understood firsthand the challenge it is to move ahead in the male issues. So I didn't really have too much to say other than really compliment you on your work. the challenge you've got and anybody else in your position has. It's one of those funny things that, when you point issues out, which is actually very easy of discrimination, sexual discrimination against men, you're immediately targeted or accused of whining and being a victim. So it's kind of a lose-lose. It's very hard to make a point, but you do it very eloquently, and thank you for that.
Thanks a lot, Ron. I've worked. You're on Vancouver Island, where Nanaimo is, right? And for
That's
other
right.
people, and I'm aware of the work of the Nanaimo Men's Center over the years. They've really kind of tried to keep up the good fight for a long time, and have had some engagements with the BC government that have gone well, and then some that haven't gone well. Teo's there. They've, like Cafe, they point out that there are no shelters for men in BC. When they're increasing the number of shelters for women right now. And there's, I think, hundreds of them. So it's hard to make inroads, but I'm not giving up. So I'm glad you aren't.
Yeah, good for you. I have worked with Theo Burns down in Nanaimo at the men's center there. He may be on this call, I don't know, but he's a great advocate for men and men's health, and has been for years. There's very few people. I think most people get worn down, and it just becomes, an interesting thing is that I pushed with Island Health over on the island here to do a study on men's health, and we were starting to get somewhere with it about the time that COVID shut everything down, and of course with Island Health and all the other health agencies, not much has happened since then. But I'm hoping that once the study is out on dealing with men's health on Vancouver Island, that there are going to be some eye-opening statistics and information.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much, Ron, for jumping in with those comments and those great ideas. I should introduce you to some of our Vancouver team. It seems like we have quite a significant representation from Vancouver and the West Coast in general, which makes sense because that's where Doug hails from. We should connect you folks together. But for now, let's move on to Scott. I think Scott is next up with a question. Okay, bear with me a moment.
Hi, Doug.
Hi, Scott.
Go ahead, Scott.
So my question is, how much of a challenge is it to keep focus on men's issues when there are more sensational headlines like Me Too and Truth and Reconciliation, and these types of things that seem to get all the media attention?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I have to be fairly disciplined about my own reactions and kind of stay professional, because I should even watch what I say here, since this is going to stay public actually, but just see cultural trends that for what they are, they're sort of important, but they might not last. And just because they're getting all the media attention of, and I'm a member of the media, doesn't mean the full story is being, portrayed to readers and viewers and stuff like that. Like, as a journalist, all journalists, but especially me, we're pulling out our hair almost every day at the kind of things that get so much attention, what gets on the front story, what's the leading TV story, because we're constantly disagreeing about what's the most important thing of the day. So it sort of goes with the journalistic territory, and I just keep plugging away. I've been writing about men's issues for 10 or 12 years. And my colleagues in the newsroom, they don't like applaud it or anything, but they keep respecting me, and and it seems so. It's a challenge for my reputation a bit, but I also don't care, and just going to keep doing it.
But you must feel like it's an uphill battle, because I mean, yeah. I would guess from what I've heard and some of the stuff that I've read, that you would say that, you know, men's issues should be getting as much, if not more, attention to some of these other things that are, you know, that kind of pop up and make headlines on a more regular basis.
But wouldn't that be just great? I mean, we're half the population, right? It's just not in the coverage of men's issues doesn't have to say they're great or even that they're victims, just in all cases, just what's going on with them. We're kind of interesting. So, but well, all the psychological research is going on into women these days. It's just an incredible blind spot in the culture, which I shake my head at, actually. I'm sure everybody on this call does too.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. I'm going to move to our next caller now. I'm just going to take a point of personal privilege here and mention a recent experience that I had just this week. I got a call from a CBC radio producer, and they're doing a series of transformational personal life stories. And so next up is a series on anger issues. And so they want me to find them angry men to talk about how they're getting beyond their anger to do a better job for their children. And I have to be honest, I was frustrated with that because, you know, it's so few and far between the occasions that CBC or any other mainstream media in Canada covers men's issues. And then when they do, it's always through the same, frankly, boring lens. And I think, Doug, you were just mentioning that there's a lot of kind of interesting, exciting angles about men's issues. And I just wonder if the media, you would think, wanted to throw some new curveballs at their audience, because, you know, new and novel typically sells. You know, male victims of domestic violence, that's kind of new and novel. You know, you'd think that that would actually raise people's interest and, you know, that it would get people to read a newspaper article or watch a TV segment. But I guess the calculation is that it might actually have a negative, you know, backfiring effect. So you'll get the attention, but it might not be the kind of attention you want. But it is frustrating because you would think the media is in the business of challenging their readers or their viewers, or at least giving them something unheard of, something new. But no, another, you know, expose on angry men. That's what the CBC is up to this week. So, you know, I try to be diplomatic, as I always try to do, and to say, you know, how about the shelter that we just opened, first of its kind? That's kind of newsworthy. That's the story of personal transformation, male victims of trauma, you know, healing and restarting their lives in many cases, doing that with children that they're caring for. You know, doesn't that fit the profile that your program is interested in? And it's something that would be new and a bit unusual and therefore potentially draw an audience. So we'll see what the response is to that. So sorry, I just wanted to cut in real quickly with that.
No, I'm glad you said that. I mean, like, novelty is one of the main criteria of what's news. Obviously, that's what makes it news. And you're absolutely right. But the cultural, ideology, I hate saying that word, but it's just so strong. People don't allow themselves to see the other side. And unfortunately, a lot of men are not very good at it either. They've kind of bought into the women are always the victim stuff. And they're not super self-aware.
Let's go to Richard with our next question. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, first I want to congratulate Douglas on his work. In 1992, I founded the first course on the sociology of men and masculinity. And I want to say that it was the majority of my undergraduate students who wanted a course on men. They were sick and tired of hearing women's issues being presented at the university. And since then, I've noticed that there's a growing interest in men's issues. But I think what we have to keep in mind is that today what's selling is what's politically correct. And what people ignore is and discuss what is factually incorrect. And if you look at the book Patricia Pearson, When She Is Bad, she has had that book banned by the women's movement in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada, because it puts in reality what is factually and historically correct, not politically correct. So I just want to say that I believe that there is a growing interest in men's issues. It's an uphill battle. I gave a paper at the Imperial College at the University of London recently calling White Male Privilege a Second Look. And while there were 10 men in the audience, only 2 women asked questions. And the first woman said, I disagree with you and your stats. And I said, what evidence do you have? And she said, I still disagree with you. And so I think the important thing is to keep, as Douglas has said, stating the facts, stating the issues, and they are, as the title of a book, Silent Pandemic.
Yeah.
And I want to congratulate Cafe because you are gradually, I think, creating an environment for men's voices to be heard. But while Stoicism is an asset in some areas, it is a liability when men refuse to discuss and be open about their own issues. So, Douglas, you're not only giving us food for thought, I think you're challenging men who are listening to this to speak up and not ignore the issues as they're presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And yeah, I do try to deal a lot, like you say, deal with the data. 3 to 1 people taking their own lives are male. Workplace deaths of 95 male. Opioid deaths are 80% male. I mean, Jesus, if that can't make people at least show some empathy, it's amazing. So, and I hope you're right that things are changing. I think they probably are. It's funny, as we're speaking, I think about the men's movement of, say, the 90s with Robert Bly and stuff like that. That was getting a fair amount of attention. It's kind of died off, but I think there's still, in that form anyways, I think it's still kind of percolating in the culture. And when you talk about data, I was just also thinking, as you spoke, what would be really great is some really good polling on men's issues, where we could test just how much does the public care about men's issues. And that would actually give maybe something the Cafe could take on, put out some polling. Because we got some polling show the public really does care about male suicides, et cetera, et cetera. That could give the movement some power, I would think.
If I can make another comment, I think what's happening is that women who bought into the women's movement, are raising their sons and finding, for example, that their sons are not being given opportunities at university, postgraduate research, etc., or seeing their friends commit suicide. I've had 2 of my friends' sons, 140, 123, take their lives in the last year. I think it's startling parents and neighbors to say, what's going on here? And they're not listening to the rhetoric of those who are politically correct. When they say that men have it, well, as I say, when's Men's International Day? Well, every day is Men's Day. I said, no way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some parents are, as you say, they're seeing the reality on the ground amongst the boys and men in their life. Like, it's only the most ideological who don't only take serious women's issues when they live with men and boys, right? People don't write off their loved ones. I hope they don't.
One of my friends who is a feminist is now quite in agony because her son, who graduated from medical school, 3rd in his class, wanted a postdoc, and he said, "Mom, let's face reality. I'm a white male. First of all, they select the women, then the individuals of color, and then possibly a disabled person, and then it will be my turn." And she couldn't believe what he was saying, but he said, "I've got to face reality. That's what's happening at graduate school level now."
Okay, I think in the interest of time, because we do have quite a few questions actually, as we thought we might, we're going to have to move on to our next question. So thank you very much, Richard. And let's hear now from Roger. One moment as I promote him. Roger, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Doug. Really a great presentation. Much enjoyed it.
Okay.
I feel like somewhat of an antique in this whole issue, because I go back to the late 90s, and I was in Ottawa at the time. In any event, a couple of comments. Firstly, Justin, don't worry about the CBC because their ratings have tanked. Nobody pays any attention to it anymore. That's number one. I was glad that Richard raised the whole point of Patricia Pearson. I'd actually forgotten about that book, because I think it's good to point out publicly that Patricia Pearson is a granddaughter of the late Prime Minister Pearson, and is the daughter of a former Senator Landon Pearson and of an ambassador, Jeffrey Pearson, and who are imbued in the hard left Liberal Party. And here she was saying these things which were not to be spoken. So I think that's very interesting. Doug, what I'd like to know is, in the late 90s, there was a somewhat more open reporting about men's issues, especially around divorce and the unfairness of the system. And I point out to you, and some of these people were from Postmedia at another time. A fellow by the name of Chris Cobb. I don't know if you know him or aware of him. A guy by the name of he was then called Bob Fife. He's now known as Robert Fife. He, in fact, would do some reporting on men's issues. And the other one was a person who became a villain, and his name is Mike Duffy. And he had a TV show, a News at 6 national show on CTV. And he would do some of the hard slogging on it, and people would do it. But I recall Chris Cobb saying to me, it was getting to the point that it was his editors were hearing terrible things about him. He wasn't reporting facts. He was an abusive husband, whatever. There were all sorts of outrageous things. Nothing was such. It was just hurled a lot of abuse at him and make accusations. Why do editors collapse in the face of this? Any idea? You mentioned you're reporting on domestic violence and your editors getting nervous. Why is this?
Yeah, I don't know. They get nervous, but credit to the Vancouver Sun editors, they let me do this stuff. All right. And without much, very little editing, if any. So, and I try to be careful and respectful all the time and deal with data. So it's hard to kind of argue with my stuff, if I might say so. But I can't speak for editors, but there is newspapers worry about public relations as much as anybody else, even though journalists try to be tougher and print the news no matter who gets who has to pay the price, but there's still public relations concerns. And it's discouraging to hear what happened. I never knew Chris Cobb personally, but I remember his name, and Robert Fife's still doing some great work in politics. Yeah. Mike Duffy, whatever. But good for them for taking on men's issues. I've always been just a bit of a different kind of person in journalism. So I think that gives, in my mind, it gives me license to do different kind of things. Like I wrote about religion I've written quite a bit about religion over the years. And even that's quite odd in journalism. I've been quite successful at it and won awards and stuff. So I think I got some respect because of that. but I think I do, my personality is to take on topics that other people don't want to take on, that I think are important. And men's issues are right up there. So
one final little observation or question, and that is why do you think men are having such difficulty organizing as a political group or entity? If you go back to the days of the women's movement, they would come up to Ottawa and they'd go up on Parliament Hill and they would say things like, and I'm quoting, the Minister of Justice, they'd appear before him, who was Alan Rock. They would say, oh, you're an asshole. And they would say that. There's recordings of all this stuff. And they would sit and take it, but they won't countenance any lobby from a men's group. Why is that?
Yeah.
Why can't men argue? Why can't men organize?
Yeah, I think I don't know, but we can speculate. And I think a lot of men still buy the argument that they are the privileged sex or gender in North America, or they're afraid to challenge it. And the standard argument is, well, look at the Fortune 500 companies. They're run almost 95% men, which is true actually. But my counter argument is that the guys running the Fortune 500 companies have nothing to do with the average men, who the ones I know who are just kind of struggling, and the middle income earners are lower, right? And then, but anyways, I think a lot of men believe that maybe they are the privileged ones, or as they say, they're not going to fight the zeitgeist.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Your answer is probably as good as mine, whatever it is, Roger. So
just looking for other opinions. Thanks. Yeah. Much enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Glad to have you joining us. For those of you who don't know, we've been joined tonight by a former member of the Privy Council, as well as a city councillor, somebody who was the first to run I think he said a men's studies a seminar or program at his university. So it's an impressive and eclectic group we have tonight. Thank you. Let's go to Chris and Misty with our next question.
Hi, good to see you all. Thank you for coming out, Doug. I wanted to ask sort of about the whole dance that takes place when discussing men's issues in like the public space. Like how some politicians might sort of be willing to acknowledge problems, but they'll never say men. And you can barely ever get them to say parental alienation or anything. And although I've noticed that some people are more willing to listen, and they start turning to talking about more equal access to services and stuff, but they still won't say men. And do you see attitudes sort of changing, where it's getting to the point where people are more receptive, and we might be more open to actually using the word men? And is it almost sort of bubbling to the surface, or is we still a long way off?
Yeah, that's a good question. On men's services and parental alienation, well, they're two different issues in some ways, but I feel some movement on parental alienation and the value of shared parenting, that people realize how nasty divorces can get and how false accusations can be so dangerous because they see themselves go through it, or their sons or their daughters, their sons, I should say. I think that issue is picking up steam, but it's so hard to measure this stuff. That's why we need some good polling. Actually, polling is fantastic. And Justin probably has a better answer to your question than I do, actually, about whether the zeitgeist is changing.
I'm actually thinking, in particular, I was talking to Sonia Firstino a couple of weeks ago about all this, her getting social workers registered. And I was trying to sort of push the limit a little bit and get her to talk about men and parental alienation. And she kept coming back to, well, that's why we're making it a health service. and it's going to be more increased services, equal access to services. But I couldn't get her to say men.
Okay.
But she really basically seemed to acknowledge, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, but no, I'm not going to say it. But
Right.
I'm trying to help. So I saw that as incredibly encouraging. But there's still this dance that we have to do around it.
It is a dance. Sonia, first to know, so people know, is she's the head of the Green Party in BC, and she's elected too.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So I'm not sure if there's much for me to add. From my point of view, and I think I've said this before in these webinar spaces, I have seen a lot of positive signs of progress, not so much at the very kind of the level of the powerful, the political class or the media, both of whom have obviously a lot of influence. But I would say, and I see this every day because I do a lot of social service work for men and families, that when you make it about services, and especially services that are filling critical gaps, people inevitably end up giving you sort of credibility for that, because they end up, at least in the social service sector, needing your services, actually having to refer men to you because, well, men really do need help, whether it's counseling or support groups or legal clinics or shelters or what have you. We're not making that up. It's hard to argue with the tangibility of that need. And so other social service agencies will inevitably, whether they really back you up ideologically or not, end up using access to your agency, and that gives you a sense of credibility that you can build on. And that's kind of been one of the secrets of Cafe success, is putting our money where our mouth is, finding a way to open these centers, providing programs and services. And again, little plug here for the residential facility we just opened, which has already had about 16 residential families using it. And we get referrals from Toronto Police. We're in Toronto, so we get referrals from Toronto Police, from victim service agencies across the GTA, from other shelters, even the Toronto Shelter Administration, which sort of the clearinghouse for making referrals to all the different shelters in Toronto, has a protocol to refer male victims of domestic violence to us, because they are calling them and they don't have a place for them, at least until now. So if you make yourself indispensable by doing something needed in the community, people will use your services and you will gain credibility, and that takes many years. So it's not a shortcut. I don't think there are shortcuts, but that's kind of been our strategy, or one of our main strategies. I am going to go to a couple of... Oh, yeah.
Let me just add one thing to that last comment that I've been thinking about. Maybe it's a positive sign that the BC Green Party is willing to talk about, oh, we really do need social services for everybody. Maybe that's sort of an inroad. And, she doesn't mention men, but that's the code. We're talking about everybody, because I got a story through on family violence that was about just that, like services for everybody. It included, gay couples, lesbian couples, transgender couples. When there's violence in those domestic situations, they need places to go to, right? A gay guy or something. And that helps open people's minds up to the idea of like diversity, and men kind of get included in that, along with gay diversity, transgender diversity, other kinds of diversities.
And Doug, we've seen that in the 4 months we've been open, we've had men of all sexual orientations access the facility, because, as you say, there's abuse and violence in all forms of romantic relationships. Certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we've exhausted all the questions of folks who put their hand up. There has been quite a bit of chatting as well, and there is maybe one remaining question that I'm going to put to you. I'm going to read to you, and it's from Jack Kammer, who is asking. He says, we've talked a lot about data, polls, statistics, and studies. His question is about creating a strong narrative. And let me read to you his other comment. He says, Douglas, you've chronicled significant injustices and failures of empathy in our culture. Who benefits from that? How do we assert a narrative about possible female incentives and motivations to assume female privileges and supremacy, so we can challenge and eventually supplant that narrative of male oppressors and female victims? Isn't that a story we need to be telling? And I think this will be the last question tonight.
That's kind of a gigantic question.
That's a multi-part last question, perhaps.
But in the sense of a big issue, like to actually start talking about female privilege is like extremely difficult. It's not one I would like to take on, actually. There's probably some room to maneuver there and some openings, but I find.
What about the question of a new narrative, maybe one that talks about men's issues or puts it in a context of more gender equality, that every issue has different perspectives, not only the reigning feminist one? As a storyteller, as a journalist, that journalists often are using narrative or storytelling as a way to communicate. Is there a way to position our causes as a story worth telling?
Well, I'm just thinking out loud, and it's reminding myself that partly why I write about men's issues, because I write about diversity issues, like in regards to ethnicity, in regards to, a lot in regards to ethnicity, and then sexual orientation, but also then I realized gender is a big diversity issue, and men don't get talked about as one of the diverse groups, right? So maybe that whole emphasis, maybe the narrative can be developed around equality and diversity, and they're very popular in a kind of a dumb way these days, but maybe men can work with that to say, no, we are a part of diversity, we are part of equality. You'd have to do a really good job to make that an interesting, engaging narrative, but I think that might be where to start.
Well, thanks very much, Doug. I think we are going to conclude there. So I want to extend my appreciation to Douglas Todd for being our guest of honor tonight and sharing a wealth of information from his years of experience, and also to our audience, who, as always, did not disappoint with their level of engagement. And as I indicated earlier, just a quick commercial for what CAFE is doing now during the federal election, which, if you haven't heard, we're in the middle of one, and the election is September 20th. We will be already have started on a mobilization effort, and if you want to join that, you can email me. I'll put this information into the chat bar. Our focus this time around is going to be on two flagship public policy issues: raising awareness of equal shared parenting, which is CAFE's position that in the case of family breakup, there should be a rebuttable presumption of equal shared parenting. And the other one we're trying to push is reforming the Canada Child Benefit Program. This is a government financial subsidy for low-income families. The problem here, and it's actually written into the Income Tax Act, is the government literally presumes the primary parent is the female parent. It is written into the Income Tax Act. And a few months ago, there was an audit done of the Canada Child Benefit Program. Believe it or not, the auditor actually recommended that this be changed. So that's a very significant boost to a reform effort. So we are pushing for making the Income Tax Act gender neutral with respect to the Canada Child Benefit Program. These will be the two big policy planks for CAFE in this election cycle. If you want to get involved by helping us raise awareness, meet with candidates for public office, we are strictly nonpartisan. We will be meeting with any candidates of any of the main parties that will hear us out. You can join that effort by emailing. You can indicate in the chat right now that you want to get a hold of me. You can also email me at jtrottier@equalitycanada.com. We need a small army of volunteers really across Canada to be effective. The idea will be to raise awareness of these issues and also plant a seed so that we can follow up with elected candidates after the election. And if you want to support any of our work, we do encourage charitable donations, equalitycanada.com/donation to make a charitable gift to support some of this unique and I think very critically important work and services and programs that CAFE is providing. So once again, thanks so much, especially Douglas Todd, also to our audience. We are going to sign off now. Doug and we will keep the webinar live for a few more minutes if there are questions that I can address, or if there are chats that are ongoing. We won't disclose them just yet, but we are going to sign off for now and wish you all a good night. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Thanks to everybody for being interested.
Thank you, Doug. Good night.